I'm pleased to interview Mike McGuire. Mike has a BS in civil engineering from the University of Pennsylvania and both a master's and PhD from Drexel University. He's a registered professional engineer in several states, including New Jersey. He's a widely published author and a board-certified environmental engineer with the Academy of Environmental Engineers. Mike has worked for drinking water utilities and consulting firms throughout his entire career. He started out early in his career at the Philadelphia Water Department, and he has held increasingly responsible positions at the Metropolitan Water District of California. He also founded and managed McGuire Environmental Consultants from 1992 to 2005. He has been active in the American Water Works for the past 40 years, and he has received the George Warren Fuller Award in 1994. Mike is currently working on a book on the first use of chlorine in the U.S., which was for the Jersey City water supply system, and that's what brings Mike here today. So welcome, Mike. And with that, I'd like you to turn it over to you and ask you, really, what got you involved in the water industry?
Again, it was, for me, fortuitous. I was a senior at the University of Pennsylvania doing civil engineering, and I was part of a panel at Columbia University, and a fellow by the name of Sam Baxter was on that panel. And Mr. Baxter, who was commissioner of the Water Department of Philadelphia, he was a very impressive guy, and I just couldn't get over how involved he was, and how clearly honest and of high moral standard this fellow was. And I just got to know him, and he convinced me that I could have a career in the water business, and that's how I got started. But and I was here on the East Coast for a number of years, working for the Philadelphia Water Department for Mr. Baxter. But then after graduate school, I went out to California, and I've worked out there for a number of years. But I'm sure you must be curious as what's a California guy doing here in New Jersey?
Exactly. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about why you're coming back here and some of your work over at Jersey City and really the history of this chlorination aspect.
I'd be glad to. It's something that really caught my attention in 2006. The Journal of AWWA asked me to write an article for the 175th anniversary issue, and I did that, and it was all part of the history of disinfection. And I tried to characterize it as 8 revolutions in disinfection history of drinking water. And the first revolution was in Jersey City in 1908, which was a surprise to me. I frankly didn't know the details of how chlorine was first used in this country. I was a little curious about just why it happened, why did it happen in 1908, and who were the personalities involved. I always thought that there must be a story there, and after I published the article, I started to do a little bit more research. And indeed, it really became a driving force for what I've been doing since I retired.
So, yeah, and let's stay on that theme. I understand that there's a little bit of a Civil War connection to this story of yours, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
One of the main characters in this story is a physician by the name of John Leal. He was a physician in Paterson, New Jersey. He also did a lot of public service in Paterson. He was associated with the Board of Health for about 12 years. He was the health officer and responsible for all aspects of public health, including drinking water and sewage disposal. So he was really connected to our business. But after 1899, when he retired from Paterson, he went full-time into the drinking water business as what was called the sanitary advisor to something called the East Jersey Water Company. Now, why did a physician, a doc, basically, he had a good practice. He worked at the Paterson General Hospital. He was on many boards. Why did he leave most of that behind and go to work for a water department? Well, we can't be sure about all of these things. It happened over 100 years ago. But I think it's quite important to know that his father, who was also a physician, John R. Leal, was a physician who was part of the 144th Volunteer Regiment from New York in the Civil War. So he's part of the Union Army, and their regiment was engaged in the siege of Charleston, South Carolina. And apparently, that whole regiment was just devastated by a problem with bad water. There was a tremendous problem with dysentery. People died of it. And it seems at that time that John R. Leal contracted what I think was amoebic dysentery. And of course, back then, there were no antibiotics. You know, essentially, if you got amoebic dysentery, you either lived with it or it killed you. So it was a very serious disease. He mustered out of the Army. He went back to Andes, New York, where he was, and his son, John L., was growing up, moved the whole group to Paterson, the whole family to Paterson, New Jersey, where he established a practice. But he suffered with that dysentery for 17 years. It must have had a tremendous impact on his son to see his father suffering. And ultimately, it was fatal. It did kill him. And in his obituaries, all of them referred to his wartime service and how he contracted this disease and how horrible it was for him and for his family.
Well, thank you. That's a very poignant anecdote, a really important fact to know. And now take us through that transition. Now, Leal's the doctor. He's involved with Jersey City. I guess his father becomes this motivating factor, this inspiration for him. Now, how does it all of a sudden translate from a doctor to being able to implement disinfection at Jersey City? Maybe just walk us through that story.
Well, there's a vice president of the United States involved in it. Garrett Augustus Hobart was a vice president under McKinley in the latter part of the 19th century. Hobart was a big guy in business and the law in Paterson, New Jersey. He had his finger in every pie associated with drinking water. He was on the board of directors or was the president of the board for all of the water agencies within that part of New Jersey, including what was called the Passaic Water Company, which provided water to Paterson. Well, besides being a great businessman, and he really was a good one, he also was a politician. And he was tapped to be Vice President of the United States in 1896 to run with McKinley. Unfortunately, he died in office in 1899, but he had a tremendous influence on Dr. Leal. Dr. Leal calls him essentially his mentor and got him to really shift his focus from being a doctor to being the sanitary advisor for the East Jersey Water Company. And what that meant was, well, in 1899, the main source of supply for the East Jersey Water Company was at Little Falls. There was no treatment plant. There were a lot of pumps and there were pipes, and they were taking water out of the watershed and shipping it to a number of cities in New Jersey. But there was a problem. There's always contamination in the watershed these days. There was no sewage treatment, and Leal's job was to go up into the watershed, find those sources of contamination, and eliminate them. You know, you can't have a privy there. You've got to get rid of that cesspool, you know, really trying to clean things up. And so that's what he did. When the filtration plant at Little Falls was built in 1902 by George Warren Fuller, another person who has a lot to say in this story, certainly Leal got to know him. Leal was responsible for the quality of the water that came out of that treatment plant, but of course Fuller was responsible for designing and building it. And anybody who's looked into the history of filtration will know that the Little Falls plant was the first, what they called mechanical filtration plant, or rapid sand filter plant that we might call today. And it really set the standard for the rest of the country. And so 1902, Leal and Fuller certainly got to know each other. But there was a problem that occurred in 1904 when a new water supply was put on to provide water to Jersey City. Jersey City had been taking water from a highly contaminated source on the lower Passaic River at a place called Belleville. Believe it or not, that was a water supply. It was under the influence of the tides. It was under the influence of sewage discharges from Newark. It was under the influence of sewage discharges from Paterson. It was really bad. The typhoid fever rate was somewhere between 80 and 100 per 100,000. That's the typhoid death rate. And the infection rate was about 10 times that. So it was really horrible. And finally, they were able to contract with a company called the Jersey City Water Supply Company, a private water company, to build a dam on the Rockaway River and form what they called Boonton Reservoir, right near the town of Boonton, which many people, of course, in New Jersey know about. And that water supply started to provide water to Jersey City in 1904. Well, there was a contract, of course, and in that contract it said that the water had to be pure and wholesome.